Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast with your host, Jerry Rogers.
Welcome to another episode. My goodness, we're piling up the episodes of the Business of America. This is the place to be if you want to hear about the doers in our economy, in our culture, the men, the women who are making things happen, nonprofit think tanks, the business community, scientists, physicians, inventors, entrepreneurs, the Teddy Roosevelt, the doers. It's easy to criticize. It's easy to say you're doing it wrong. But the men and women who actually put themselves out there in the arena, that's who we base our conversations with and our focus. And today I'm very excited. A friend of mine, I've known him for years. He does excellent work. And every time I turn around, there he is, either in an op-ed piece or a coalition or on the local news even. David, I'm going to tell you about this in a second, David. David Williams is the president of TPA, the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. Did I get that right? I got it right. TPA.
You got it right.
30 years experience. I thought you were much younger than someone who's been 30 years experience. But guess what? I have 30 years experience now in this town. And so we are not old. We are coming into our own. We're better than we were when we were younger. Certainly have more wisdom. And I want to talk about TPA. I want to talk about some issues that are in front of us. But I do want to tell you one thing. So I wear several hats, Real Clear Politics. I have a Sunday show in Baltimore City, WBAL. I have a Sunday show. If it's Sunday, it's Jerry, the most important Sunday show in America. And every so often I'll turn on local Baltimore news, and I'm telling you, I see David Williams all the time commenting on the tax situation or some political or policy situation in Maryland's most important city. So I know you do DC, but you do local stuff too, and that's important. But anyway, before we get going, tell us a little bit about TPA.
Well, the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, we are a consumer and taxpayer watchdog. And Jerry, thank you for having me on the show. And you said something at the very beginning that my boss told me, my first boss in DC in 1993. He said, it's one thing to complain about government spending, government taxation, but it's another thing to have solutions and recommendations and to be a doer, right? So I've remembered that for 3 decades now, just how important it is not just to complain about what's happening in Washington, D.C. or Baltimore, but to actually come up with solutions. And you mentioned Baltimore. Oh, my goodness, what a mess that city is. And from the mayor to the city council to the board of estimates, and we could have a whole show on that, but we're not. So, there's a lot to talk about in Baltimore, but a lot to talk about in Washington, D.C. with the economy, with the Biden administration, with Congress. A lot of bad things are happening to the economy. And this is happening because of Congress and because of Joe Biden.
It's interesting because I do lay out the challenges. I hate using the word problem because most of the challenges that we have, there are solutions. And it wasn't that long ago that Congress had committee hearings. Congress had regular order. Congress would have witnesses, investigations. They would have a joint Senate and Congress committee to put forward legislation. I saw former Labor Secretary Reich was on Twitter or X, whatever it's called these days, and he was saying that the wealthy complain about the student loan forgiveness, but they didn't complain when they got their Trump tax cuts. And my response to the former labor secretary was very simple, and that is, regardless of what you feel about student loans, we should reform it. Young people do need relief, but we should follow the law and the routine. What Joe Biden did, unfortunately, was untethered from the law. And regardless of how you feel about the tax cuts during the Trump years, It was passed by both houses and signed by the president. So just for a second, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about mission creep at the different administrative agencies, talk about mass tort litigation. So we'll get into that. But before, though, we do talk about returning to regular order, having real debate, civil yet spirited debate, and coming up with solutions, even if it's not 100% what we want. You know, what did Reagan say? You know, if it's 70%, Gingrich said this, if I get 7 out of 10 things, I'm on board. So what do you think?
Yeah, and that's critical. And regular order is so important. You know, let's talk about that tax reform. That was done during regular order, is that you had the House pass something, you had the Senate do it, they went to conference, the president signed it, and it was one of the most historic pieces of legislation in this country because it lowered taxes for corporations, but also individuals. And everyone says, oh, the corporations got this massive tax cut. Well, what that did was, the first thing that corporations did was give out bonuses. They gave out, you know, thousands of dollars to each of their employees in bonuses. And I remember this distinctly, is that Nancy Pelosi mocked it. And she said, oh, what's $1,000 for a family in Ohio? Well, guess what? $1,000 is a lot of money for a family in Ohio. So maybe you shouldn't mock that. And of course, she was, you know, standing next to her, $6,000 refrigerator that had her expensive ice cream in it. But you see, that's
with all
the problem.
The ice cream.
Yeah, that she didn't understand how much $1,000 really was. And I don't think a lot of people in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill understood that. But that was a great example of regular order and really good legislation that passed. So, yeah, and student loans. I mean, this isn't, you know, rich people that are complaining. It's actually middle America. You talk to these people that either don't have student loans or paid them off, and they go, wait a second, why are we doing this now? Why are we just wiping out the student loans for these folks? Why are taxpayers paying for this and not reforming the system? And I'm glad you brought that up, because how do we do this in a way, you know, maybe restructure interest rates, maybe restructure, but still have them pay it back? It's important to have people pay back student loans for a number of reasons. First, personal responsibility, then of course, taxpayers, to make sure that taxpayers are made whole.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, it's interesting too. In the last several years, I mean, I think it's been almost 3 decades since we've had regular order on the budget, on the 12 budget bills Congress is supposed to put forward. I know that the current speaker is talking about next year going back to regular order and having the committees do the work. And I hope that happens. God bless them. I hope it happens. I don't care if next year we have a Republican, you know, next January, next Congress, a Republican speaker or a Democrat speaker. I want the speaker to go through regular order again and allow for debate, allow for amendments. But however, in the meantime, before we get that speaker, and maybe it's the current speaker, the less Congress does, the more the courts do, or the administrative state, the executive branch does. And I know that you do work with all the alphabet agencies, FTC, SEC, CFPB, and all the rest. But I want to talk about mission creep. And we can start with FTC. There's a lot going on at the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. What's your overview? What are the challenges there? What should we be looking out for?
Yeah, so the Federal Trade Commission, they're responsible for a lot. I mean, they shouldn't be, but they're responsible for a lot when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. And basically, they're supposed to dot the I's, cross the T's. They're not supposed to be such an activist sort of agency and go by the consumer welfare standard. And when I say consumer welfare standard, 2 businesses merging or one acquiring the other, is it good for consumers? That's all they're supposed to look at. But it is right now so heavily politicized by Lina Khan, who is the leader of the FTC, that any merger, any acquisition is automatically under scrutiny by this agency. And this is a classic case of weaponizing the government. And you have a person, Lina Khan, who has taken it upon herself to go after these businesses. And there's no economic reason why she's doing this. It's a political reason. And she does this for political reasons. And there was a report that the House just put out, I believe it was the House Judiciary Committee, that talked about people inside the Federal Trade Commission complaining about Lena Khan and what she's doing. This wasn't just a vendetta or a report that Republicans put out. This is from conversations within the FTC and the concerns that they have about the processes inside the agency. And when you tie together the lack of regular order, the lack of Congress doing things to this mission creep, that's the connective tissue that we have. And that's the important connective tissue, is because when Congress isn't doing something, that means the agencies are. And it's so obscure that we don't know a lot of what's happening inside the agencies. And Jerry, you know this, that agencies, they always expand, they don't contract, because expansion means more money. If you get smaller, well, you
More
can't
budget.
justify that bigger budget. Yeah.
Now, we need some agency heads or sub-agency heads who would say, let's make our agency non-viable. There will be no need for us if we get these things right, or Congress does its job. I want to, on Lena Khan, look, I've worked in this town now, similar to you, for approaching 30 years. And I can't tell you 5 other heads of the FTC. But since Lena Khan has taken over the FTC, her name is constant in the op-ed pages, the think tanks, from your group, TPA, to myriad other groups similar to yours, but also to the AEIs and these other groups. And it seems to me, I'm going to say something that's provocative, but correct me if I'm wrong. It seems that she's driven by ideology, and she's not, again, I use this, tethered to the law. That if what, under her leadership, the FTC does, if it fits what they want, they don't necessarily care too much if it's also in line with what the law and what Congress, right? The FTC has authority because Congress has given it authority. And, it seems to me that under her leadership, the FTC is moving away from the law. And here's for my friends on the left, and we both have friends on the right and the left. Lena Khan isn't always going to head the FTC. Someday it might be someone who is ideological, but more center right. And then again, I don't care if it's on the right or the left. I want our public officials to follow the law. What do you make of that?
Well, that's exactly right, is to follow the law. And we don't want the government weaponized by either side. And, Biden is not going to be president forever. Listen, that day may be next year at some point, right? Or maybe 4 or 5 years from now. But the fact of the matter is that the FTC will be led by a Republican at some point, and the left is not going to want that agenda. And there should not be an agenda by an agency. That's the crazy thing, is that we hear about the agenda of the FTC. There should not be an agenda. They are supposed to be a referee. They're not a player in the game. They should be a referee, and they're not acting like that. They're making the rules up as they go. And just look at her record. Look at her track record. So many of her cases, she has either lost, have been thrown out of court. She is very unsuccessful when it comes to bringing cases. That should tell you everything you need to know. You have former FTC commissioners that have left the agency because of Lena Khan, and they have written op-eds really just, so critical of what's happening inside the agency. And it's something that I've never seen before because, Jerry, we've dealt with a lot of agencies, FCC, you name it. People come and go. But we have not seen the kind of just vitriol against Lena Khan and her leadership and what she's done with that agency. I mean, this is, it's incredible to see.
And, it's interesting, too, because we get caught up in the political debate over left versus right, conservative, liberal, or Democrat, Republican. But the fact of the matter is, I think a lot of the issues we face now, and I liked how you phrased this when we started, TPA is a consumer watchdog group. There are lots of special interests looking after big corporations, big labor, big government even. Right? They have their lobbyists and attorneys and all their public affairs firms. But it seems to me that what's getting lost is the working class. the doers in our economy, the entrepreneurs, those who are creating startup firms. And what does this mission creep? I'm sorry. How does it impact the economy? And like the mom and pop, the kitchen cabinet issues, the kitchen table issues. How does when these big agencies take on ideological fights and aren't doing their due diligence to do what they've been created, how does it impact the economy? How does it impact working people?
Well, it stifles the economy, and it really hurts small business. And people think, well, the FTC, you're talking about two big businesses that want to merge. That's not necessarily the case, because a lot of times you have a startup that has a great idea, doesn't have the capital to really move forward and be anything significant. Then you have a Microsoft, you have a Google, or whomever come in and say, I want to buy your company. And the FTC says, well, that's non-competitive. Well, this small company is going, please buy my company, for a couple of $1 billion, because again, they don't have the capital to move forward, but a bigger company does. And that's where big versus small, big versus big, the FTC gets it wrong, and it really hurts the economy. And again, I don't think people realize how much it hurts small businesses in this country, because that's the goal, right? Is to create a product or an idea and then have someone say, I want to write you a check for $10 billion. That's it, man. That's the American dream.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, if someone wants to purchase this podcast, I'm happy to merge with. No, but I remember, again, years ago, I used to work at Pharma, the trade association for the innovative drug companies. And we were always in the trenches on Capitol Hill, fighting this fight, price controls, innovation, intellectual property rights. And I'm sitting in a meeting one day, and we're, pharma, big companies, corporate America is usually attacked. Oh, those big corporations, evil corporations, the energy companies, the drug companies, the whatever it is, big health, whatever it is. And there's a place to criticize what some big corporations do. No one is perfect. But I remember thinking in this meeting, saying to myself, how many people, families, are benefiting because they work at Pfizer, Novartis, or whatever the company is. And I said, what we ought to do is we should let the folks who work for these companies understand that this legislative agenda, this regulatory agenda, this mission creep with these agencies isn't just going to hurt the big business. It's going to hurt all the families that are connected to the business, and then also all the peripheral industries that make their living right down river, so to speak. And so again, this idea that they're going after the big guy is just simply not true. It's really the consumers who are hurt. What do you think about that?
The consumers are hurt, and I'm glad you bring up pharmaceuticals, because boy, what a great example is you have the FDA, that it takes 12 years and about $1 billion to get a drug approved by the FDA. And this is what is stopping innovation. The FDA is stopping innovation in the drug space because they have really strict standards. And I'm glad they have strict standards, but right now, if a drug is, I think, 95% effective, it gets approved. It's obviously there's other stages in the whole process, but 95%. If it's 94.5, FDA says, nope, go back to the drawing board. You have to redo this. Well, that's ludicrous, Jerry. I mean, if you're talking about 94.5,
and most companies just throw it away then. And so because they can't spend another $1 billion or $2 billion or $3 billion. I'm glad you said this, because I've had on this program, on the Business of America podcast, we've had small pharma on the program dealing with rare disease, dealing with therapies. And you know what? To your point, what saves them often is, yes, the angel investors and the good science, but then a biotech firm or then a pharma firm comes in and takes their innovation to save lives and allows it to be presented and access that's wider, broader. And you're right. If there are agencies that are stifling this innovation, it hurts. Again, we talked about workers. It hurts patients. It hurts those who are suffering from disease and need new therapies.
Yeah, and if I am suffering from a rare disease and someone comes to me and says, "Well, it's only 94.5% effective. It's not the 95. Do you want to take it?" Heck yeah, man. Give it to me. I mean,
Yeah.
so that's
Well, and
that's
again, this idea of right to fail and give, it does seem to me that those in charge sometimes don't trust the rest of us. If I have a rare a disease, a chronic condition, and this medicine has gone through this therapy or biosimilar or biotechnology has gone through and has 85, 90% effectiveness, then why don't we have a mechanism to allow the consumers, the patients, to take their own risks and make their own decisions? Let me ask you this. In Washington, people say risk benefit. I think that's a phony analogy or a phony figure. It really is always risk. There's a risk of doing something, but there's a risk of not doing something. And even with medicines that are 99.9% effective, medicine is such that it could impact you differently than 100 million other people. So there's a risk in taking aspirin. There's a risk in starting a new business. There's a risk in getting into the arena. I think government mission creep with these agencies, they want to get rid of risk for us. And it's just not working. What they're doing is getting rid of options and choices. And let me make the decision for you. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and that's the reason why we call it the nanny state, right? Is that they think they're taking care of us. They think that all the things that they do are taking care of us. And I remember this was, years ago, where the Department of Transportation had rules about windshields for golf carts. I mean, this is what they were focused on, is making sure the proper windshield was in a golf cart. But again, they think they're taking care of us. And, it's twofold here. They think they're taking care of us, but it's also the expansion of the bureaucracy. And, I wish we had like 5 hours to talk about the FDA because they are an absolute mess and are preventing innovation in so many different areas, whether it's people to stop smoking, whether it's drugs, food safety. They've really dropped the ball on so many things, and it affects so many parts of our lives right now.
Mass tort litigation. When I was at the Manhattan Institute, I worked with Wally Olson, and Wally Olson had a book that was about the tort industry. And then he for years ran a website about, we think about, again, big labor, big government, big business. We don't think about big tort litigation. And I know that consumers, the options they have, the choices they have are often stifled again, or they're often they're taken away because of these mass tort litigation issues. How does again, we like the legal system. Companies should be held accountable. But what we're finding out, though, people leverage the legal system, lawfare. We see this all the time, mass tort litigation. How does this impact innovation? How does this impact consumers?
Oh my gosh. I mean, right now there's an estimate that it costs the American economy about $500 billion a year, the lawsuits, and that's just a suck out of the economy. So when you're taking $500 billion a year out of the economy for this, it's not going for productive uses, right? And a lot of these fees, I think it's upwards of almost 90% are going towards legal fees and lawyers. And listen, lawyers are necessary. They're needed in our society, unfortunately. But when you talk about
David, do you have a law degree?
I do not. No.
Oh, good. Neither do I. So no, I don't. No. But you're right. We do need lawyers. But I'm happy I'm not talking to one right now. Okay. I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. So, this is something that needs to be addressed because lawyers and especially tort litigation really is a suck in the economy, and we can't afford that. I mean, we have inflation that's at still really high, and this is a small area that we're addressing, really for consumers, and Congress absolutely has a role in this and really should be looking at this and putting some guardrails around litigation.
You know, it's interesting. I like the term guardrail because I used to teach high school. I also was a varsity coach, and I realized that guardrails, rules, boundaries, right? A baseball diamond, there's a foul ball. Football, you're out of bounds. It does seem though that depending upon your political interests, depending upon your access to firms and lobbyists, that folks are constantly trying to play by their own rules to expand the boundary for them, but not for the other guys. A lot of government picking winners and losers, and how does in these mass tort situations, how are businesses unfairly targeted at times? Is there an alliance between government or ideological interests with mass tort efforts? You know, how does this impact consumers?
Well, listen, the bigger the company, the bigger the litigation is going to be, the more money they're going to ask for. And just like with taxes, companies don't pay taxes, consumers pay the taxes. So you raise the corporate tax rate, consumers pay that.
Yes.
You know, you have these crazy, lawsuits that cost billions of dollars that they settle, for. Well, consumers pay that because they're going to pass that cost onto the consumer. And that's why when you talk to folks on the other side of the aisle, the left side of the aisle, they say, well, no, this is necessary. It may be necessary, but there has to be a limit to this. And they don't understand the repercussions that it has in the economy. And again, we're talking about $500 billion a year. This is not a small amount. And government is really complicit in this. It's because they make everything, easier to litigate and to sue.
I also think that the government too often will pick villains. You know, Fred Smith, who used to be at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I was at CEI for years. I consider Fred a mentor. And Fred would say that if you can make a business sector, a sector of the economy, and then corporations or businesses within that sector, if you can make them to be a pariah, well, then you can regulate them, you could kill them. And it seems to me, again, with mass tort litigation, with mission creep, with these different alphabet administrative agencies, the government is picking, you produce energy, you're evil. You produce solar panels, you're good. Like white hat, black hat, the villain and the hero. And it seems to me, and I want your thoughts on this because you're in the game, you're in the arena. How do we push back so the government can't pick winners and losers? Because it seems to me it's all connected. Legal, lawfare, with administrative mission creep, Congress stepping back, and then you have the administration again picking winners and losers.
Well, it really takes the right members of Congress and making sure that we educate them. And, Jerry, we started this conversation talking about how long we've been in this, in these battles, in these fights. And, one thing that I have forgotten is that the Hill staffers now are like 24 or 25 years old, right? So they have just come into this for the past few years. And we have to remind them of basic economics, of basic free market economics. I mean, it's really our job to educate as to, how the economy works because they don't know. I mean, we know, and we've seen it for a long time, what works and what doesn't. We've seen the tax cuts, the 2017 tax cuts. I will guarantee you that most of the Hill staffers, especially on the House side, were not in Washington, D.C. when tax reform was passed. They did not see the economic benefit of tax reform. They're just reading about it. And if they read the wrong thing, they're going to see there's no economic benefits from tax cuts. So it really is education, and the education starts, unfortunately, on Capitol Hill.
I'll date myself. I worked for a member of Congress from New Jersey in the early to mid 90s. And I remember when I first came to town, Republicans were in the minority, and it was Michael, Minority Leader Michael. Was it right? Am I remembering that correctly? But regardless, I do remember this. I do remember working more in a bipartisan way. And I don't want to get all touchy-feely and let's all be, but the fact of the matter is there was a time when the political parties, especially kind of the working class middle, a Jersey Republican, could work well with a Ohio Democrat. And on tax cuts, I mean, Reagan's tax cuts were passed by Tip O'Neill, a Democrat from Massachusetts. And so this idea that Congress has to be in perpetual dysfunction is just not true. And so what is it? Do we need better candidates, or do we need more TPAs? Do we need more groups like yours educating staff, because if there isn't a TPA or a number of other groups, then you're right. Where are these staffers getting their information from? And you know this as well as I do. Members depend upon their staff for not just talking points, not just 3-minute speeches in the well of the Congress, but for significant and important decisions. How do we get better candidates, or how do we get better candidates? How do we better educate the Hill staff?
We can always get better candidates. I refuse to believe that there aren't better people out there that could be members of Congress. And, I'm reminded when we talk about the 90s of the Penny Kasich spending plan. And this was Tim Penny, a Democrat from Minnesota.
Tim Penny, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, right?
And John from Minnesota, and then John Kasich from Ohio.
Yes. Sorry. Kasich. I met during that debate. I was working for a member of Congress, and I have Penny's book still, and he signed it for me. And I remember thinking, I was a Republican. I'm thinking, but he's a good guy. And Kasich, there's something important, I think, every so often to look behind us, because sometimes the solutions are there. We're going to wind down, but, I remember being a kid. I grew up in the Bronx in the 1980s, and everyone said, you remember what Ford said about New York in the mid-70s? He said, cities are ungovernable. Just the heck with them. And then a guy comes in, a little nerdy guy who used to go to the Manhattan Institute, their luncheons with yellow pad and write notes down, a guy who was a former prosecutor, a guy named Giuliani. He comes in, runs as a Republican in New York, and wins on his second try. And the urban renaissance he created, it traveled from New York to San Diego to Boston. And remember this, Giuliani was able to do what he did in terms of crime and economic reform with a Democratic city council. So again, if we want to fix our cities, if we want to fix our public agencies, the FTCs, the SECs, if we want to deal with mass tort litigation, it seems to me that we have the playbook. We just have to read it and implement it. And I'll give you the last word. What do you think? Am I wearing rose-colored glasses here?
Yes and no. I mean, you are, but that is the way forward. And that is the way for us to get together. And listen, we have a $34 trillion debt. And we eclipsed this in January. How many members of Congress have talked about our debt and our deficit? I mean, no one is talking about this. We need to get back to some basics, and that's look at the fiscal future of this country. And unfortunately, members of Congress are not doing that, and it needs to be done. We have entitlements going bankrupt. I mean, this country is, we're worried about the next spending bill when we should be worried about not only that, but the future spending bills and what this country can afford or can't afford.
David Williams, I think you gave us our next topic for Jerry and Dave Talk Politics. I think I'd like to have you on again soon, and I would like to look at the deficit, because this is This is a problem created in a bipartisan way. And I'd love to talk solutions with you, and we'll do that in the future. This is fun. I could do this for hours, by the way. But awesome. I know that you have to. You have things to do. I got things to do. But I think the first order of business to make a change is you have to have these conversations. You have to speak the truth. Have the courage to speak the truth, and even when it's uncomfortable. and I think that's critical. Before I let you go, anything about TPA, anything coming up that our viewers should know about?
Well, listen, tax reform. We have the Senate that should be taking up the tax reform bill. The House passed it, and we need to move that forward because I think we talked early on about this was tax reform. This is going to keep the engine going in this country. Is we need to keep the corporate rate low. We need tax break for individuals. We need R&D expensing. I mean, there's so much that's wrapped up in this. And you talk about the economy, Jerry. This is about the economy. And when the economy does well, that means individual people and households are doing well.
The rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Yes, exactly.
Anyway, hey, David Williams, thank you so much, man. God bless you. This has been another episode. I think one of our, if not maybe the best, David. You look at some past episodes and you tell me if this might not be the best. But this has been a great conversation. And we're happy warriors, and I'm so happy that you came on today. So anyway, goodbye and God bless.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
This has been the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast, hosted by Jerry Rogers. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream